Good evening, members. Can we make a start, Mr. Councillor Hookway? Thank you. Thank you. Okay, we'll start by reading the emergency evacuation announcement. In the event of a fire or other emergency, please exit the building in an orderly manner. There's three now. Orderly manner to the assembly point, which is located in the market car park. Please do not delay your evacuation to collect any belongings. Please do not return to the building until given permission to do so by council staff. And please note that this meeting will be audio recorded. Thank goodness. Can I also ask members to turn their mobile phones off or switch them to silent, please? Thank you very much. Apologies for absence. We have received apologies from Councillor Dray, Councillor Mrs Shaw and Councillor Stanley. Substitute members, Councillor Griffin for Councillor Mrs Shaw. Don't think there are any other apologies received. Non-members attending, Councillor Mrs Hoy and Councillor Sperring. Item number 4 on the agenda, minutes of the meeting held on the 5th of December. Just prior to asking whether members agree for those to be signed, you would have had a statement passed around to you, which hopefully you've had a chance to read. Just for the sake of for clarity and for the audio recording, Paul is just going to read that out for members.
Right, this is the statement from the Section 151 officer. In response to the query raised at Review Committee on Tuesday the 5th of December under Item 7, the Treasury Management 2017-18 Mid-Year Review, regarding the security of inter-authority lending, officers agreed to check if there were any specific central government guarantees in place for inter-authority lending. Having consulted our Treasury Management advisors, Link Asset Services, whilst there is no specific guarantee from central government to underwrite local authority lending in the Local Government Act 2003, no local authority has become insolvent to date, and it is unlikely that central government would allow an individual local authority to default against its creditors. It is therefore judged that lending to another UK local authority is unlikely to be riskier than investing in a bank or building society that falls under a similar national sovereign credit rating. The 2017-18 RDC Treasury Management Strategy, agreed by Review Committee prior to full council in February 2017, sets out the criteria for the counterparties the council will lend to. This states that the council will only invest with institutions within countries that have a sovereign credit rating of AA+ or above, with the exception granted by full council of the UK, which has an AA rating, and in financial instruments which fall under a number of defined headings which include term deposits, call deposits and bonds with other UK local authorities. The risk is further mitigated by the limits on lending to other local authorities set out in the 2017-18 strategy, which states that a maximum of 3 million may be lent for a maximum duration of 1 year. Under the criteria of the current strategy, the council could therefore choose to invest with other UK local authorities, although to date it has not done so. Officers will continue not to lend to other local authorities for the remainder of this financial year, pending agreement of the 2018-19 strategy, which will be presented at Review Committee in February 2018. It should be noted that were RDC to remove other local authorities from their agreed counterparty list, this would further limit the pool of counterparties available for the council to invest in, and would not allow it to benefit from potentially higher investment returns.
Are members happy with that response from the Section 151 officer, or has anybody got any questions regarding that? That will form part of the minutes. So are members happy for me to sign the minutes of the meeting held on the 5th of December with the statement that's just been read? Okay, thank you very much. Any declarations of interest, including whipping declarations at all? Councillor Mr Mason.
It's a bit of a strange one, really. I am acquainted with Mr Landlord under the item 8. But as I didn't get involved in the petition process, I don't think there's any particular issue that I need to declare apart from acquaintanceship.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Mrs Mason.
And the same as Councillor Mr Mason, acquaintanceship with Mr Landlord.
Thank you very much. Councillor Newport.
I too am acquainted with Mr Landlord.
Thank you very much. No further interest. Okay. So moving on to agenda item number 6, which is social media and the council's communication process. Attending this evening's meeting for this particular item, we have Sean Scrutton, Managing Director, and Vanessa Conroy, the Corporate Communications and Public Relations Officer. This item came from a request for the public to suggest possible topics for the committee to consider. A response was received from Mr James Titmus regarding social media, and members then widened this to include the council's communication process. We were under the impression that Mr James Titmus would be attending this evening's meeting, but unfortunately it doesn't appear as though he will be. Members will have had a report sent to them via email, and in addition to the report there's an appendix, and Paul has also sent around some additional information regarding the communication strategy and the communications protocols. There's quite a lot to read and take in, but I trust that members have had a chance to have a look through that. If I may, could I please just refer this to, or the report to Mr Sean Scrutton? Perhaps you could just, although members have had a chance to read, if you could just perhaps go through the main bits and then answer any questions that any members have afterwards, would be appreciated.
Yeah, certainly, Chairman. I think what I sought to do in the report was to first of all set out the key areas of social media that the council has been using over the recent times, and those are set out in paragraph 2.3. So I think we tended to use the standard social media platforms that most of us are familiar with. So Facebook, sending out tweets through the council, and so on and so forth. So those are set out in paragraph 2.3. And then what I sought to do on the next page was to give a short summary of how I think we see the evolution of the council's use of social media. So I think that we perceive that we've actually been modestly successful when we compare ourselves to nearby authorities in terms of our use of social media. So I think that's fairly positive. And I think Vanessa can add to this if you have particular questions. I think we get a fairly positive response from residents on issues that are raised through our social media channels. The one thing that I think it was worth dwelling on for a moment was a platform that the council has adopted in the last year or so called Tell Me More. It's actually a platform that in its native form is called Gov Delivery. But what that platform has allowed the council to do is to sign up residents to receive information directly from the council. And that's proving to be, I think, a fairly successful way of providing information to residents with links to relevant information and web pages. And I think that including the residents who have signed up for information directly related to planning policy matters, I think we've probably got in excess of 10,000 residents now receiving information through the Tell Me More platform. So I mean, I think that's pretty positive, and you know, it's another way of enabling us to communicate directly and positively with residents and provide them with information. And it's particularly useful, I think, for situations. At the moment, there's the consultation on the issues and options with the local plan, and I think it's a particularly useful way of being able to share that sort of information as that consultation progresses, and to keep people up to speed with the process. In the appendix to the report, I sought to answer the various questions that you received from the resident. I don't think probably it's appropriate for me to go through those, but you know, we're happy to answer questions, Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Mr Mason.
Wow. Communication works, so it's good news. We don't have to worry about Watford. So, tell me more. Okay, that was a heading. I suppose my first question is 10,000. Well, that's really impressive. Are they all really residents? And then what I don't know is if people are no longer interested, is there an unsubscribe box anywhere on there? I don't know that. But those are kind of questions that occur to me about our flagship platform. But Mr Titmuss is now a parish councillor, I understand. He's a Hawkwell parish councillor.
I believe so, yes.
I'm honour bound as a Hawkwell member to, to support him. I would support him as a resident anyway. I think it's a shame he's not here, because I wanted to ask him, was he happy with the response that the council's now given that he was suggesting we could do better. And I'm just wondering if something untoward has come along that's prevented him from attending, and that he has an interest rather than just be satisfied with that response. And I guess two things. One, I think we should contact him and ask him. I think it would be awfully polite to do so. We're not inquiring why he didn't attend. We're asking him whether or not he was completely happy with the response. And I would like to ask him, does he think that there are any opportunities where we could do better? Because although he's given us a challenge and we've now responded, I don't know, and I don't think we should leave a stone unturned when there's an opportunity. So that's where I am with it. I'd like to hear more from Mr Titmuss. And the other thing, I wonder if Mr Titmuss could meet with Vanessa, because I think that might be, an appropriate invitation to take all of those things I've just talked about forward with him, if that's what he'd like to do. No obligation.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Mr Mason. I think Vanessa was nodding there that she would be happy to meet them, so I think it probably would be appropriate to just make contact with him and give him the opportunity to meet if he wishes to do so. Would Sean or Vanessa, would you like to come back on anything that Mr Mason has said at the moment? Or?
I mean, as far as I'm aware, Tell Me More is a platform that exists on the website. So I'm sure that members who visited the homepage on the website will have spotted the Tell Me More overlay flying up on the homepage, and in fact, I think on other pages, and it offers the opportunity for residents to subscribe, to that information platform. I guess if you're not resident in the district and you go to the Rochford Council website, you can probably sign up for it. But you know, I suppose in reality, the people that are likely to use our website are probably more likely to be residents than not. Certainly, we've been advertising the Tell Me More platform through various business forums and business breakfasts, and we've got a particularly good sign up from businesses in the district, which I think is quite positive. A lot of interest in that. In terms of how the platform works, it's fairly responsive in that you can sign up for the information that you want to receive. You could sign up for everything, or you could sign up for specific notifications dealing with particular subjects, and you can log into your account and you can unsubscribe as well. So it's flexible in that sense. And Tim, just to add, yeah, we're happy to have a dialogue with Mr. Titmus and see whether or not he's got some information that we can use to develop our systems.
Can I come back?
You can, yep.
The question I was really asking is on every message that residents or anyone who's subscribed to receives, is there an unsubscribe on the message? Because otherwise it's very, I subscribe to a lot of things. When I get messages from those boards or wherever they are, they ask me whether I want to continue, and you can unsubscribe, and it's on the message. Whereas it sounds like as is buried in the website where you physically got to go. So I'm wondering why we don't, give people the chance to clear their inboxes if they don't want to receive. Sorry, I didn't.
That's okay.
Yeah, Chairman, I
you could
actually,
confirm.
I mean, we can check that, but I don't know the answer to that question. It does put me in mind of the emails that seem to appear in my email box that are promoting cures for tinnitus and baldness, which I find rather amusing. But I'm told that actually it's difficult to get rid of those, because if you choose to unsubscribe, it actually generates more activity. But hopefully that wouldn't be the case with Rochford.
No. Well, I think.
I hope not. No, of course we're not. But we'll check that information.
We'll check and come back. Thank you. Councillor Mr. Hoy.
Thank you, Chairman. To follow that, as ever, is always fun. A few points. First of all, I'm going to have my normal rant about the fact that, and I think it's quite relevant to this, because I'll come on to that immediately afterwards. We don't seem to have equality and diversity implications yet again on a report. And
Sorry?
we don't have equality and diversity implications on a report. Yet again, we don't. And a bit disappointing as it's from the Managing Director.
Okay.
I raising that to start with because I'm sure people may have not seen during the week a news item around Twitter where it's very effective for blind people. There is an element on Twitter where you can add a photograph description to it as well, which will be read out to the user as well as the tweet. So that's why I'm raising the equality and diversity, because that obviously helps include people who are blind, for instance, and I think a social policy media used in this way can be very beneficial. It adds another. It lets people who are blind see what's going on in the council potentially, and with the picture description, it adds even more. Considering we have mentioned here we use a lot of pictures. Moving on from, I'd like an answer on that as well, if we are aware of that and if we do use that picture description. Moving on from that, again, I use social media. I am under the impression we use it in what I might call an old-fashioned way. We're using social media to report what we would normally send out on paper anyway, in the way of press releases. And I'm wondering if that's necessarily the right way to use it or the only way to use it. And I think this is where it'd be interesting to invite the resident to actually meet to see if he had other ideas of how we should be using it rather than the way we are. As I see it, we are using it to issue press releases, and I see very little else. I see some issues around planning sometimes come up, which is available, but we don't see anything else, anything which may interest people. And I'm interested that we've actually said that young people are more likely to use Snapchat and Instagram, but then we are saying, well, actually we'll use GIFs on Facebook and Twitter to encourage them. But I think I really doubt if a young person is going to follow and join Twitter just to see a GIF, really. That was all I was going to say. I'm not sure we are using it the right way, or if at all.
Okay. Thank you. Vanessa, sorry, did you want to come back with the first question I think you went to? And
with regards to using Facebook and Twitter and the younger audience, we actually do have our Instagram as well, which we are currently trying to promote a little bit more. With regards to the youth again, the planning and policy team, the issues and options, we're using Facebook to boost posts now. We're going to pay, I think it's about £14, and they guarantee you 10,000 extra views, but you can demographically target it, and we are looking to target a younger audience for that. We've tailored the questions as well so that they should hopefully be more appealing to a younger audience. That's just one of the steps that we're trying to pursue with trying to make contact with those types of age groups.
okay, thank you.
We currently use it on the website. We use a platform at the moment called Hootsuite, where we schedule our tweets and our Facebook posts. I'm unaware that you can put a description on that via our Hootsuite, but I can double check it. But as far as our website is concerned, every time the comms team issue a press release or anything with a photo, we do put a description down so that people that may have hearing difficulties will be able to see what the picture is, what's in the picture. Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Chairman, if I may, I think
Yep.
probably we want just to give a comment about the variety of information that we do put out through social media. So, I mean, I think it's much more than was suggested. I mean, I think it covers everything from, fun days at Hockley Woods to the weekly planning list of applications received to, so it's a broad range of information that we actually put out from the council to try and engage with residents who've got a different number of interests. And certainly the Tell Me More platform has got various buttons that allow you to select the subjects that you're interested in, as I said earlier. And incidentally, it does have an unsubscribe button at the bottom as well. So.
On every alert, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Just before I take another question, just this isn't trying to catch you out, Vanessa. Can you just tell me, when was the last Instagram post?
Stephanie was actually looking at Instagram yesterday. I'm unsure whether anything was actually put out, but
because
it was
personally, I'm not a huge fan of social media. However, I am an Instagrammer, and I happen to know, or I believe I happen to know, that the last post on Instagram from Rochester District Council was in 2016.
Yes, when our senior comms officer went on maternity leave, we had a few issues with passwords and security, but Stephanie, the other comms officer, actually has got the account up and operational now, and one of our aims is to start using it much more than obviously we have been.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Newport.
Thank you. It seemed to be sort of driven by numbers with this social media and Tell Me More. When in the report it says an average engagement rate of 79%, and is that an open rate on those emails? Could you clarify what you mean with engagement rate? The other thing, Tell Me More is, to me, it's email marketing. So it's all very well having 10,000 subscribers, but what happens if there's only 20% being opened? Do we then send a follow-up email saying, oh, you haven't opened an email that we've sent to you for 4 weeks, are you still interested? I think we should be doing that sort of process, because we could eventually grow a 50,000 email list, which is basically reaching 5,000 people, because that's how many's interested in what we're sending out. So I think that's one element to Tell Me More. The other thing is with Tell Me More, every time you go on Rochford's site, it prompts you. That's bad practice. It should only prompt you after. So if you close it and then visit it again, we should be setting that to maybe prompt every 3 days or every 4 days or every 5 days. There should be a gap. It shouldn't be every single time you go on that site. It's a nag screen. It's really annoying, and it puts people off. That's just industry standard. The report on Twitter I found to be really basic, because I'd really want to see engagement on there and demographics. So what are we reaching? Are we reaching 18 to 24-year-olds? Are we reaching, middle-aged people? Are we reaching elderly people on Twitter? How are you targeting? I'd like to have seen that in the report, and is that something that you can actually provide? Do you look at that? Are all the processes we're using on social media, will they and do they conform to GDPR, and will they going forward? And that's something that we're really going to have to look at, especially with Tell Me More.
GDPR?
The new data protection rules.
I think it comes in force in May, doesn't it?
Yeah, in May. So we really haven't got a lot of time to look at that. It's not a lot of time. I looked at, Twitter's a really difficult social media medium to use, I think. But I did look at other councils around our area, and Rochford does have, if not the lowest, one of the lower. I looked at 7 different councils: Tendring, Colchester, Malden, Braintree, Basildon, Brentwood, and they're all 9,000 followers. Oh, it's a numbers game, have we got quality followers? Have we looked at who's following us? It's all very well having huge numbers of people following, but is it an effective tool? How are you measuring whether it's effective? So I'd just like the answers to those questions, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Are you able to address any of those questions this evening?
I think with regards to the data protection and the GDPR going forward, everything that we do it does fall within that anyway. We're very conscious of photographs that we put out. We make sure that we have the relevant sign-offs for anything that goes out as well. And we don't actually send anything. Any information that goes out comes right back to our website. We don't actually send raw data out. Certainly by Tell Me More, everything will link back. Obviously, with press releases, we send out information again, but we look at the data protection side of that. It's kind of standard what we do. With regards to your question about Twitter and how we monitor it, we only use the very basic Hootsuite package. It's a free package, and we could drill into it and get more information, but with the current package that we have, we cannot get any further information on that. We're looking at we've just had a meeting with a company called Musterpoint, and they work. It's basically a platform like Hootsuite, but based purely at the focus is local government. And having a look at the prices for that, to upgrade on Hootsuite, we would be talking about £7,000 a year, whereas with Musterpoint, you're talking just over 2,000. The salesperson there is going to come back to us with some figures, but it does look promising, and this is certainly some of the information that we could get out, and we can certainly target our audiences a lot more once we have that. What did you ask? The open rate. I believe that is, on Tell Me More, the 79% is an open rate. It's certainly more than we've had before, but obviously we can't see if you're going to actually read those emails that go through, but it's promising if somebody's obviously clicked on the link to take them back to the website to read the information.
Okay, thank you. With regards to Muster Point, when would you anticipate hearing back from them? And if that cost is reasonable, or is it as expected? Is that something you would be looking to go forward with?
Well, I guess that's a question for Sean and the people who have the control over the budgets. But I mean, it's something that we could implement very quickly if we can.
And that would give us the information that Councillor Newport has
it will,
raised tonight.
It will not only give us the information for that, but it will make running social media a lot more efficient, and we can tie it in with community planning, emergency planning, so that the on-call officers can use it. It's a much friendlier platform to use, and it also gives us some security so that individual officers can sign in as themselves rather than us using one signing. And it gives us a lot more control about what's going out and approving what's going out. So it would be great if we could have it.
Okay.
As I say, that's down to Sean.
Thank you very much. Councillor Mrs Mason.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Firstly, I'd like to just go back to the 10,000 figure. I think that does sound good, but I am the concerns I think have been raised about it. It's certainly punitive. But I think we need to ask what objective communication with our residents, purely and simply that, and presuming to reach those that are hard to reach. And when I say hard to reach, generally speaking, we're talking about the younger generation as a generalisation. And I've not heard much about Snapchat and Instagram. Yet everyone I know that's a lot younger than me uses Snapchat and Instagram. But those two mediums, as popular as they are and as useful as they are, they'll probably change with time, come with their own risk. And the problem here is we have to be very careful to be accurate, to be factual, not to be speculative. So the quality of our communication, I'm not talking about terminology, because terminology should obviously fit the media, but the quality of the information and the accuracy is important. And with that in mind, we as councillors and members all have social media policy. What we have, with no disrespect to our officers, and I'm sure are very good at this, but we have employees who are being asked to communicate this, and some of this can go quite viral, this information. Do we have a social media policy to protect our employees?
Well, all officers have got to comply with the normal code of conduct and their contractual obligations. But it's a very good point, and I actually think that the general principle of the comment that you make about the quality of communication that goes out from the council is crucial. That is extremely important. And at the moment, by the control by and large of information that goes out through social media is with Vanessa and her comms team. But the question is, how far do we roll that out to involve other officers in communicating information about council activities? And that's something that needs to be I think probably needs to happen, but it needs to happen in a properly managed and controlled way to ensure that we don't have issues with the information that's communicated.
Mr. Chairman, I can come back on that. Yes, I agree with you. It would be better to come from various sources with different terminology and to try and reach different audiences. But when I say that the code of conduct applies to officers the same as it does to members, but we have a very restrictive social media policy on us, and it's there, we're told, to protect us. And I would like to see a serious consideration given, and perhaps you could talk back, Mr. Chairman, if we can, on what sort of social media policy
Thank you. Councillor Milne.
Just a couple of issues. One is that the government website, www.gov.uk, does actually have instructions, and it is built into all of the Gov.uk web communications channels, systems of not only unsubscribing but also filtering. There is a facility, or should be. I'm all for this as a communications medium. I think we've got to keep it relatively simple, but as has been pointed out, have an audit trail. And the other side of this is it does actually fit in with more than just communication. It fits in with the concept of early intervention, because we get awareness of issues. It fits in with maximising our assets, because it is actually a pretty economical medium to use, or can be. And it does enable communities, because then we see the other point that's coming across and get the feel for things. And I'd like to suggest that we look upon this almost like a gigantic electronic suggestion box. I would be surprised if the social demographics of the people that are actually using it don't reflect the social demographics of Rochford. And if we're mainly retired older people, you'll find that there would tend to be a higher percentage. But we've got an opportunity here with this communications medium, and I'd like to ask about this, to look at perhaps even the more senior school children in our schools, and an awareness of local democracy and so on, so they can actually be encouraged to have a look at this and search these things, because there is this issue with younger people not voting, not taking local government seriously, and that'd be quite useful. Now, what I would like to suggest, as it's electronic, can we have some means of filtering and kind of databasing the main issues that keep getting raised? So when we get thousands of messages, we want to know, what they're mainly about, and are we doing something about those issues? Is it something that we need to talk about? Even Jamie's point there, where he was talking about Instagram and the more modern methods, and actually making it really professional. And have we got someone with a communications degree in the council? Somebody who's actually into it, somebody who's perhaps switched on and happening, And I'm not saying you're not. It's just that sort of thing, because this is the modern world, and I'm all for it, really. And it does fit in with three of your main priorities: early intervention, maximising assets, and enabling communities. It really does do that. So that's the points I'm making.
Okay.
So, and the involvement of perhaps younger people in schools. They use Instagram and Snapchat because they think it just vaporises after you've read it and doesn't hang around like a bad smell like Facebook or Twitter, which gets politicians into trouble, and or can do if we're not careful.
Okay.
Anyway, thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Mr. Hoy.
Thank you, Chairman. Now we can come back. I think Councillor Milne sort of vaguely mentioned along the areas I was going to raise again. I think just to try and explain what I was on about, it's how we use the social media. We've got a policy of using it, but I don't think we have we have something here which says what we're using it for, which is to perhaps disseminate information, but not to engage with the residents. So, and it's interesting what Councillor Milne said, how when you look at our Facebook page, there's very few, if any, responses or posts from residents. Is that because we aren't allowing them on there, or is it because they're not posting on there? There's not very many retweets of Twitter or of Instagram because it's not really being used. And this is the issue. I think unless we have that feedback, we don't know what the information is. As Councillor Milne said, it'd be useful to know what people were talking about to us. And if we don't have that on those platforms, it may be on other ones, but on those platforms it definitely isn't there. And I would guess, and I would like to know, I think that would probably take officer time though, because we presumably wouldn't allow unvetted, which it says in here we wouldn't anyway, unvetted responses. But being an admin of 2 Facebook pages in the district, Care About Rochford and the Holbridge page, I'm aware that they have to be deleted quite often, posts, because of the language amongst anything else. So I'm sure that might be one of the barriers to using it in that way. That doesn't mean that it's not a bad way to get information out there. It just means we just have to use it in that way and not to use it for engagement. I'd like thoughts on that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are you able to come back on any aspects of those points raised, or?
Well, I can tell you that the two main subjects that we have engagement on are waste collection and planning. We get quite a few benefit inquiries as well. Obviously, they can be of a sensitive nature, and we have data protection issues. So we will usually message people directly. But where we can answer people, we certainly do try to answer them. You know, you're right with officer time. You know, what can take a couple of seconds for somebody to type out a question. You know, we have to go to the departments, certainly with waste collection, and then we have to relay out to our depot team, who then have to come back to us. So it does take quite a lot of time to do that, but we certainly do try to engage. With regards to Twitter, it's interesting that you say that we don't actually retweet a lot. I think we've been retweeting quite a bit of information, certainly from places like Public Health and the NHS, certainly very recently.
So you're saying we are not retweeted by residents?
Oh, right. Sorry, I thought you were saying our retweeting. I mean, we have. It depends. I mean, you know, we've put out.
Wrong.
No, I mean, it depends what the subject matter is. I mean, we put out a press release about the open day for the Vulcan at Southend Airport, and we got loads and loads of retweets. It was the most activity that we'd had for a long time. So it does depend on the subject matter. You know, unfortunately, you know, some of the information that go out, residents possibly don't want to share. You know, your bins are going to be emptied, or there's a delay. Certainly on Facebook, with waste collection, we get a lot of people. You don't retweet on Facebook, but a lot of people, if we put some information out, they'll put somebody's name in so that it will appear on their feed. So we are getting that engagement with people. But, you know, I do agree, there's certainly, we could use it a lot more effectively. And using packages like Mustercoin, I think, would definitely help that.
Okay, thank you. I've one more member who's indicated to speak. Just before I go to them, just on 6.1 of the report, it says annual cost of any software. The TMM has an annual charge. Are you able to confirm what that is?
Chairman,
just
I
approximately.
can't recall off the top of my head. I think we probably need to communicate that information. Have to do that after the meeting.
Okay. Councillor Mr Mason.
Thank you, Chairman. As I was the first person to speak, I left a few things out, and you know, I trusted that other members would see them and bring them up, and indeed they have to a point. With regard to social media policies for employees, there are two arms to that. There's one when you're acting as an employee, which I think Councillor Mrs Mason spoke about, but equally there's the social media policy for people who are employees but are using social media for private purposes. They equally have got to, you know what they can and can't do around the council's interests, I suppose. I've had quite a few residents who commented on social media about the existence of a social media policy for members, who turned around and said, but I've got one on me as an employee, not only as an employee, but also acting in a private capacity around the interests of my employer. So there are two arms to that, and I hope we don't miss the two arms, because they're quite important. Councillor Hoy picked up what he said. Again, to me, we're using, and I have had some exposure to managing technology, we're using social media platforms as push information. We're not trying to generate an interaction, and yet the very nature of social media is interaction. That's what it's supposed to be about. And I think that's probably what Mr Titmuss or Councillor Titmuss is actually getting at. And I think to a certain extent it's because we are pushing information and it stops there. We're not asking the next question. We're not asking for response. We're not asking for interaction. We're not asking for feedback. And I think that it's the style of communication that needs to be considered. Or if we're going to tackle a subject two ways, we push and we equally recognise there are questions that may need to be answered, and we pose it in such a way to get those questions so we can understand more about what our residents really think. And I think that's one of the things that councillors do, or certainly try to do on social media, but I think the council should do it as a body corporate as well. In fact, it should do so. The last thing I wanted to kind of say is that it's an important series of platforms. We also have an emerging one. It was called Street Life. It's now Nextdoor, and it seems to be getting quite big. The last time I posted something personally or on behalf of myself as a councillor, there were 798 people it reached, which is not insignificant, and that was just the people bordering Hawkwell. So, you know, I think there's something to explore there. And I'd certainly recommend looking at Nextdoor and any emerging platforms as well. I'll stop there, Chairman. What I'm hoping is that you'll manage to summarise what the committee has felt about these things and where we go here, particularly with Mr Titmuss.
Yep, thank you, Councillor Mason. Vanessa or Sean, have you got anything further you'd like to add at this moment, or are you happy for?
I think certainly in response, excuse me, to your two-way comms that you were just talking about there. We've had the budget survey running, and we thought we would trial a Twitter poll with that, which we did over Christmas, and we doubled our figures for the response so far with the budget survey by using Twitter. A Twitter poll, you set them up, they only last 24 hours, but we had over 175 replies compared to what we had been doing, you know, in the older style. So, you know, there certainly is growth there to use social media as an engagement and an interaction tool, because residents did come back to us, and it's something that we'll be discussing with our consultation officer about making sure that further surveys are written in a way that we can use them on a social media platform.
Chairman, I'd like to come back on that because members didn't know anything about Twitter being used in relation to the budget survey. And, I'm a little disappointed, but we didn't know. The other thing is to ask a question around it and to say, well, it's very interesting.
Oh, it does. Very interesting, because I've got a copy of that survey booklet at home. In fact, I picked it up at the public library, and I was very interested in seeing how it was laid out. How on earth can you put all of that information, all of those questions, into a Twitter poll? Because it went on for several pages. How can you do that? If you didn't include the whole survey, how on earth can you actually accept another set of responses which weren't actually in the same form as the original? In other words, you've done two surveys. I don't understand. I'm going to ask questions.
It was one of the questions that was on the budget survey, and it was an easy one that I could translate for a Twitter poll. With what they're going to do with those figures is down to obviously the consultation officer, but with all these new initiatives we need to try them to see how they work. And obviously the budget survey, one of the budget survey questions was around the services that the council provides, so we thought we would use it as a tester to see what kind of response that we had back, because obviously if we weren't going to get any response, or the response was going to be poor, we would need to look at other methods to engage.
Chairman, could I know what the question was, please?
Are you able to clarify?
Yeah, the question was about the importance of council services, and I had to split the question out because you're right. It wasn't in a format that was easily relatable for a Twitter poll, so I split the question out, and I believe there were 7 services that we questioned on. So I sent them out as 7 individual Twitter polls to see what to see what kind of engagement we would get back, and we were obviously we got that engagement, and it's something that I think I've recommended to our consultation officer, as I say, that it's going forward that we use that because we doubled our figures.
I'm sorry to prolong this, but what I don't understand. And if I had been briefed, I think I would have understood. So these Twitter polls were individual questions. So you posed 7 individual questions and got 175 responses to each. So
we got no.
You made 7 polls, and you got 175 to the first one, the second one, the third one, the fourth one, the fifth one, the sixth one, or the 7th one. Or did you just get 175 in response to any one of those 7? All those 7.
We got 175 in total, so that would have been spread out across the 7. The figures which have been sent back as they've come in, because obviously, however they're going to display those figures will be down to the department that issued that. But this was a trial to see what kind of engagement we would get.
Okay, thank you. That's obviously the first one of that type. Have you got any plans to do any more, or?
Well, I mean, obviously, potentially, yes, but it's with everything on social media, we need to see what works before we do it. So, I guess that will be down to departments. But we had a good engagement rate anyways.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Mrs Mason.
We've gone out with a budget consultation, which has been approved, agreed. Yet we have someone here doing something totally different. And I want to understand is, have you done that just as an experiment for Twitter, which I can understand, that's fine. But if you're using those figures in the survey, that survey then becomes valueless because you're distorting it. I mean, statistically, it's nonsense. But I can understand what you're doing and to experiment, but I would like some confirmation that that's not going to be skewing the budget that has been agreed by the council. Budget survey, sorry.
No, Chairman, it won't. It was clearly an experiment, a pilot to actually get some evidence as to how we can use and develop social media.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
It wasn't clear.
Okay.
But I think there was one point that just thinking back that was raised that I think Councillor Newport made about the flyouts on the website, and I actually thought that the flyout wasn't supposed to appear every time once you'd registered. So we'll ask for that to be looked at.
Thank you. I think that the report asked the committee to note the contents and consider whether to make any recommendations to council. From the comments this evening, there are a few areas which I think members would like some more clarification and more focus on, in particular a policy to protect employees of the council on the content of social media, and a bit more information with regards to picture descriptions and audio messaging. I think that's what it's called, isn't it? Councillor Hoy, I'm looking. So perhaps I think this might be something that's better that we ask for this to be reviewed and a further report come back in perhaps 6 months once you have a decision, Vanessa, on whether or not the council go ahead with a possible... Yep, bear with me 1 second, with a further consultation. Sorry, what was the name? Can you clarify that? Muster Point.
May I ask you, I'd like, as he's a constituent of mine and others, I'd like to know whether he is going to wish to participate further, because if I bump into him, I don't wish to...
Yep. No, I think it was...
question.
I think it was noted at the beginning of the meeting that we would be contacting him to ask if everything was okay and there's not any sinister reason why he wasn't able to attend this evening, whether or not he was satisfied with the answer that he'd already got, and inviting him to make contact with the council should he wish to discuss it.
Could send a tweet.
You could, yes.
Jimmy, can I suggest that we make contact with Mr. Titmuss if he's happy to have a chat with Vanessa and go through the information that we've summarised in the appendix to the report and add to that if he wishes to, then we can do a brief written report and circulate that after the meeting rather than necessarily waiting for the next meeting of the committee, if that's
I think that would be absolutely fine. I think when the report comes back to the review committee, perhaps in 6 months' time, members would want to see whether or not a policy had been prepared or written, agreed with regards to employees. We would look obviously at try and get some further statistics with regards to the captive audiences. Is there something else that you would like included? Yep.
Vanessa, do you think it would be possible for you to record all the tweets that RDC receive, so that we can look at the content of what people are asking in those tweets? And there is a really easy way to do it, and if you need to know, let me know.
I mean, obviously, if there's a function that we can use. Oh, okay. As long as it doesn't, contravene any of our IT, because we can't just download certain software. But yeah, I mean, data protection, I'm not sure.
Okay. Okay, and if that could be included perhaps in the next report as well, if you'd like to see that. Is there any other specific areas that members would like to see included in a report that comes back, in addition to the ones we've already covered this evening? Councillor Mr Mason.
I did mention that we could decide how to vary our style of approach to social media. There's, the traditional push that we use. I'd like to see consider, maybe we could see some examples of, a typical push set of information, more like a press release. This is happening. This is happening, and one that is alternative, which might actually get a response, or might design to get a response and feedback. We then need to, before we engage with that sort of activity, we've got to work out who's authorised to respond. We've got to work out a lot of other, and resourcing a lot of other things. So I'm not suggesting we go ahead and launch it right now, but in the response, I'd like to know how we're going to extend our social media to feedback rather than push.
Okay. So, Vanessa and Sean, are you happy for this to come back to the review committee in perhaps 6 months' time with an update as to where we are, having taken into consideration the members' comments this evening? Is that okay?
So before the summer recess, is that what you have in mind?
Would it be before?
I think that'd be reasonable for us to give us an opportunity to look at the issues that have been raised by the committee and take those forward. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay. Thank you, members. Moving on to. Oh yes, sorry, Vanessa. You're welcome to stay, or depart if you would rather. Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, moving on to item number 7, which is the Emergency Planning and Business Continuity Review. Attending for this item this evening, we have Matt Harwood-White, the Assistant Director of Commercial Services, and Jeff Stacey, the Emergency Planning and Business Continuity Officer. This item was requested following the fire at Grenfell Towers to establish what preparation for emergency events the Council had in place. Members will have had the report circulated to them. And in addition to that, there are some additional documentation, Appendix 1, 2 and 3. If I could possibly ask you just to describe to members the main parts of the report and highlight any areas that you feel you need highlighting, and then answer any questions that members have. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Evening, members. I think that the report probably speaks for itself. It's probably worth saying a few words, perhaps, just to sort of set the scene and set the context. Emergency planning and business continuity, by its very nature, becomes high profile after significant events, as you move from managing a response to a recovery phase. But I suppose in reality, what the report tries to tease out is that emergency planning should be and is indeed considered as part of day-to-day service planning. That's why, working with Jeff closely, we've sought to take a more proactive approach to emergency planning and business continuity to ensure we fully consider and explore our local risks and our approach to those risks, coupled with the resources we have to deliver those plans. So the report seeks to set out how we carry out exercises to test our response, and then build on this feedback and indeed the lessons learnt into future plans. It's also worth pointing out, again, as mentioned in the report, that as a small authority, our resources are limited, and that's reflected in our approach into how we deal with these emergencies. So we seek to reallocate resources where necessary, where they're needed most, and prioritise service delivery. And again, it's in the report, but we also make full use of mutual aid wherever possible to ensure we can prioritise services and make use of that aid. So, in summary, the report sets out how the Council has a duty, as you'll see in the report, to plan, prepare and test our response to emergencies. The report also sets out how we discharge these duties through partnership working, which is key, and the preparation and testing of our emergency plans. That ensures the authority is well placed to respond in the event of an emergency. Hopefully, as I say, the report speaks for itself. We have Jeff with us this evening, who will take some more technical questions, and more happy to answer any of those questions that members may have on the report this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. No members are indicating to ask any questions just yet. Oh, okay. Councillor Newport.
Evening, Jeff. Does any part of this plan rely on the use of email? Just the first question.
Doesn't rely on it. Quite clearly, that's something that could be a single point of failure. So we look at other methods of communication as well. It's not dependent on just that.
Okay. So with communication to members, how would we expect to be communicated with?
Depends on the circumstances of the time.
Right. Oh, sorry.
Yes, it depends on the circumstances and time, but yes, we could phone you direct. It could be a question of sharing emails. We are looking at, we talked already about the use of social media for getting information around. Yes, we'll be using whatever sort of source types of communication are available to us.
Okay, sorry. Sorry, as we already know, there's quite a lot of members that don't use social media, and should we be relying on, or should we have prior knowledge of how this information would be disseminated to us? Because the way I look at it is we're probably feet on the ground, and we could have, in the case of a disaster, or something simple such as travellers, arriving in the district. Residents may knock on our door, they may contact us by phone, they may send us a tweet, they may contact us via Facebook. But how are we expected to know where to look to the council for receiving the information as to how the council will be handling the situation? Because when we had travellers in my ward, it was on a weekend, and I phoned the out of hours number, and they were just totally clueless. They just, oh, travellers, and where are you? That was the type of questions I was getting. I didn't know where I was going to be receiving the information from. As a new member, I had no knowledge. The only way that I could try and find out some information was by phoning another member that had been at the council for, a significant longer time. So I would expect us to have a predefined route of communication, if you like. Some members, would be expected to receive it either via email or via phone. Simple as that, really. So we know what to expect.
No, it's been our practice so far that we will try to contact the chairman and or the deputy. We will try and contact direct anybody who we think is going to be directly affected by what's happening because it's their ward, their parish, whatever. In more general information, then that tends to go out on email, and then it tends to go on to the website for more general information. But as I say, if there are people whose area are particularly affected, then we do try and speak to them direct, because it's the usual thing with communications that there's a difference between getting the information out there and actually engaging with somebody to make them aware of something's happening and making sure that they've got that message and speaking to them direct. So we do make that distinction. And so if it was something that was affecting you directly, then we would try and speak to you. The issue with Careline, hopefully the new service will be a lot better than that.
If I may just add to that, if it helps, I mean, in terms of your first point about use of email, and as Jeff said, clearly it's a single point of failure. So that would be our initial use of how we'd communicate. If emails to go down or for any other reason, I think, we've identified that phone calls can be made to group leaders initially and then disseminate, depending on the type of information we're getting and the scale of the incident. But I think it's interesting, linking to the early conversation about social media and use of it, where I think there's a broad discussion there around use of WhatsApp and other potential ways of sharing that information. It's certainly something we can look at and bring back.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Hookway.
Thank you, Chairman. I know that you've been around various parish councils asking them to update their local emergency planning and that. How linked in is this in with the various parishes? Because this is all interconnected. And when we talk about communication, you're going to have situations where you're going to have parishes trying to exercise their local plan alongside Rochford exercising its plan, so that they've got to cooperate and coordinate to make sure that the response is actually working. I mean, an example of communications I know that at Wakering, obviously one of the areas that they have to consider in relation to flooding, and as to whether all normal communications might actually not be available, and so they have the provision of two-way radios. Now, how does that then link in with what the district might be doing in an incident where people are trying to communicate in that form where normal communications aren't available?
In terms of the parish plans, what I've been encouraging the parishes to do the primary thing is really to let us have contact numbers. Giving them our contact numbers and asking in return for contact numbers so that we can speak to people, because you're quite right. I mean, they're the people who are seeing and responding to it there on the scene, and it's very important that we get some feedback directly from the front line, if you like, as to what's happening. We will certainly seek to get liaison officers down there as quickly as possible to also help with that feedback. In terms of if traditional communications start breaking down, then yes, we look at sort of other opportunities that are available to us, working in particular with the emergency services and the radio systems that they have. Currently Airwave, although they are looking to sort of change that. So we use their systems. Beyond that, it's looking at if it's a question of having to send somebody down there and come back with the information, that's what we'll have to do. I know in one exercise that one of my colleagues did, they actually got messages back by horseback, but not suggesting that's necessarily a preferred method, but it's if everything else fails, we do have to be inventive.
Thank you. Just before I go to another member, I have a couple of questions, if you wouldn't mind. In the report, it talks about rest centres. And it says that rest centres are one of the key ways in which the council may be asked to support our residents. These are where the council uses its leisure facilities to provide emergency accommodation for those evacuated from their homes. Are Rochford District Council, are these rest centres considered enough?
Obviously got a dodgy finger. They're very much an initial place for people to go. No, I mean, there is no way that they are suitable long-term accommodation. They are somewhere where people can go immediately when an event occurs. We have sort of plans and procedures to make them as comfortable as possible, including providing bedding and so on. So if they do have to stay overnight, we can make them a little bit more comfortable. But it's not supposed to be a long-term accommodation.
No, not in terms of long-term.
And what we will be doing is a lot of the focus that we have is working with those people to get them into better accommodation, whether they've got the ability to, through their insurance or insurers, to go into hotel accommodation, whether they've got friends and relatives they can go to, if there are other places that they can stay. What we then concentrate, obviously, on the people who, for whatever reason, don't have that opportunity, and we can look at how we can rehome them.
So, for instance, when you talk about emergency bedding, that's something I am aware that Kensington and Chelsea Council had great problems getting at very short notice. Do we actually have a supply of emergency bedding somewhere, or how would we?
Yes, we have our own supply. I've also been doing some work on behalf of all the district councils around rest centres, which has ended up in us. We all used to have slightly different processes for doing this. We now all have the same process, and we all have the same equipment, so that if we were to ask for mutual aid, then they all work the same way. They all work to the same forms of processes, and they also keep the same equipment.
Okay.
So even if we use all the sort of air mattresses and bedding that we've got, I can then look for mutual aid from 13 other authorities.
Okay, thank you. Also, it talks about emergency volunteers. Am I right in thinking that emergency volunteers at the moment are just members of staff?
Yes.
And how many are there?
And in terms of volunteers we've done training, we're down to 15, 16 now. So it is only a small number. The way that we use the emergency volunteers is very much, if you like, a sort of first team to respond. So they're the people that I've done some training with, have got some experience, and that we can deploy immediately. They've all agreed that they will also, if at all possible, help out of hours. So they'll be the people that are deployed, first of all, to really find out what's happening, understand the problem, report back to the leadership team,
Okay.
And from there, we can look at what resources
I mean, just touching on that point, touching on what Councillor Newport said, would it not be an idea, or have been an idea for councillors to have been asked whether or not to undertake that training? Bearing in mind our geographical spread across the district, and knowing the district as well as we all do, and knowing our wards as well as we do. I mean, 15 to 16 in emergency volunteers, I get that there's an emergency response team, but if all those 15, 16 people are from one particular part of the district, and we as members cover the entire district, would it not have made sense? Or is that part of this emergency volunteer training that's going to be undertaken in 2018?
We would certainly look to engage with members anyway, and for them to assist in whatever way we can agree between us and is sort of seen as best. The role of the emergency volunteers as such is rather more specific, and they will do things like that. I've done training with them in running and operating a rest centre, so how that works. We would certainly be more than happy for members to come in and assist with that, but in terms of the tasks that we have to undertake, there's a sort of more specialist training that we do for that. But yes, more general help we could always do this.
I think it needs to be extended to members. I think members should be trained, or at least given the opportunity to undergo the training.
Yeah, I'm quite happy to do that. As I say, we've done this project to standardise the rest centre approach throughout the county. So we're just literally that project finished at the end of last year. So I'm now putting in place training for the coming year, and there's no reason why I can't include that in member training.
Thank you. One last question I've got. In this report, it talks about various kind of scenarios, worst case scenarios affecting flooding. It mentions Southend Airport. Mm-hmm. Have we actually identified what is the biggest risk to our district? I note that it said as recently in August this year we undertook a scenario of a fire in a block of flats. Now I'm assuming, and I'm not knocking that, I'm assuming that was in immediate response to Grenfell Tower. In reality, is that really the highest risk to us? I'm not aware that we've got any significant blocks of flats that may catch on fire. Surely, are there other areas that we should have perhaps concentrated on?
Yeah, the work on following Grenfell Towers was to, as we do with any major incident, we do look at what's happened, we look at what we can learn from it, and what implications it may have for us. In the discussions we had, what was coming more out of that were some of the communication issues rather than the specific risk for blocks of flats or anything like that. So it's what we can learn, even if it's not a specific risk to us, we can still learn some of from what's happening. In terms of the overall risk, there are risk registers. There is a national risk register which is put in place by the government. There's also an Essex risk register which we refer to and look. Yeah, the top risks are things like pandemic flu, so we plan for that. Certainly East Coast flooding is high amongst those risks, something which does particularly sort of affect us. The pandemic flu and flooding are certainly the key ones. They're the main ones.
But would it not have been prudent for the council to have perhaps undertaken an exercise with regards to flood, rather than a fire in a block of flats that we don't really have?
Yeah, I mean, we do that as well.
You do it as well?
Yeah.
Oh, apologies, that's me. You do that as well, or
yes.
When was that done? Should that not form part of this report? I would have thought as many members represent areas that are prone to flooding or susceptible to flooding.
Yeah.
Flooding would have been a more appropriate.
Chairman, maybe if I just come in, I mean, just in terms of the exercises we've run a number. I think we've highlighted that as a exercise we have run. We have run other scenarios of flooding, of loss of office accommodation and other exercises. That's one example. I think it's an interesting point in terms of, and it's often an issue with emergency planning where we tend to rehearse and plan for an incident that's just happened. And as you, Chairman's pointed out, that's after it's happened, it's by that point we're actually looking at other issues. So it's important that we take the generic lessons that Jeff mentions around the exercises in terms of across all our approach to planning. But yes, in terms of other exercises, there have been a number of them, and flooding, yes, clearly one of them is high on the agenda.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Mrs Mason. Thank you. Thank you very much. Councillor Mr Hoy.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a few points. No equality and diversity on the report. I wonder if I was advised by Mr Bostock that there was a new template. Perhaps officers aren't using the new template, which has it included. Yeah, reading the report, it's fairly comprehensive, and again, I hesitate to use the words Grenfell, but one of the issues coming out of there was perhaps the acknowledgement by the council that they themselves may not have been in a position to help properly, and I wonder, have we got any criteria by which we will make that judgment if something happens in this district where we can readily agree that we need help immediately from central government, and we have a contact number at the very least to do that. With regard to that, I know a lot of the actions are the leadership team rather than the managing director, and actually it does refer to chief executive rather than managing director in the report at the back. So decisions are made with the chief executive and leadership team, it says. I really think that needs to come back to decisions made by the managing director. I think it needs to be one person making these decisions. With regard, so that's the first question. How will we decide that, and are we aware how that would work if we didn't feel ourselves capable to do it? We are a very small council, I would say, around I think about 160 employees off the top of my head. Might be one or two out there. So I think we would struggle to cope and to maintain our day-to-day business as well if there was anything major. Moving on from there, the other point I think I'm echoing our chairman and also Councillor Mrs Mason and other councillors in that residents also expect councillors to be doing their bit. They've voted for us and they expect us to be helping to some extent and would expect us to be helping. And I'd echo the point. I'm happy to be trained. Even if I was not elected as a councillor, I'd still be happy to put myself forward to make use of that training. We have local knowledge. I remember when we had the last serious prospect of flooding, which actually didn't happen, police were being sent to Holbridge from outside the area and they had, although they should have had, they had no knowledge of local vulnerable people or where the vulnerable park home sites were. They had no knowledge, so I was directing to them. So this is the knowledge you're possibly missing out of with people actually in the wards on the ground at the time. Try not to make it worse, obviously, but we're out there to help. So that's an important point. I think I'd be open for training. I'm sure other councillors would as well. And again, I'd also say that, to me, we've listed at the front, or there are listed likelihoods of what the problems might be. I think flooding is probably a high risk. The airport is a high risk. I'd also obviously mention the prospect of a nuclear power station a few miles away might also be a risk in the case of a possible meltdown or through flooding. I don't know. That would be obviously very major. What actual scenarios have we worked through? I know you've just mentioned it, but have we actually worked through in detail a flooding scenario, for instance?
Chairman, I'll answer a couple of those, and Jeff might come in maybe with some more detail. The question about, I think it was your second question, Councillor, regarding decision making. I think when we sort of purposely wrote the sort of the policy to enable it to be flexible and resilient, in that not putting all decision making on Sean if managing director wasn't available at the time. So we actually purposely made the decision that it will be a member of the leadership team. If Sean was present, then clearly I believe that would be Sean. But we were actually testing some of these plans, picking the worst possible day, picking a Friday in the middle of August when a lot of people may be on leave, for example. So testing this to its limit. What do we do if people aren't available and have to make those decisions? In an ideal world, yes, I have a full leadership team there around the table. But when these things happen, invariably they happen at the worst time. But I do take your point. Yep.
I think it's particularly important for chain of command, people knowing who, if we've got, is it 5 assistant directors at the moment? Who is in charge? Who's making the decision? If Sean isn't around, or the, I can't remember the title of the new. Yes, the treaty director isn't around, who presumably would be after Sean. I don't know, do we know? I think it needs to be quite clear.
Yeah, no, I take that point, and there's something maybe to tease out of the report, but certainly we're trying to build resilience into it. But yeah, certainly from an audit point of view, the final decision making needs to be clear, and I'll take that point. I'm going to have Jeff to come back on the point of the I think it was around drawdown of broader resources for a major incident. I think you were referring to.
Yeah, it's what we term as sort of escalating the whole response. I mean, certainly if it's something that's beyond what we can deal with, then it goes through to a sort of county-wide sort of system of response, which will be led by what they call a strategic coordinating group. So it'll be senior people from the emergency services, local authorities, other agencies that might be involved, that can look at bringing in those sort of wider resources. And then if we're escalating it up from there, we start looking at cross-border assistance, and then going up to central government assistance. So literally from what may start down in Rochford as something quite small, as we find out the extent of it, we can go right up to central government and talk to central government departments.
Thank you. Are you coming back? No, thank you very much. Councillor Milne.
Yeah, my question is actually, there's already structure in public service around emergencies. I mean, I've had experience with teams that we've sent out the tsunami in Sri Lanka, you know, and that doesn't get much worse than that. But they define who's gold, silver, and bronze in all of this, which is the directors or whoever the emergency officer is. But to make things very clear, you've got a very nice, quite full generic report here. But really, the emergencies seem to come into categorisations. There's like a category 1 type one, which is just local. You can contain it with a local council employees. Isn't too big a problem. Then there's category 2, more serious, where you're going to involve other agencies. You may well still have communications. Could be a rail crash, that kind of thing, or something even bigger than that. But when you move on to the next one, that's why I'm coming to this question about categorisation. If you've got a package around that, and someone's made the decision, this is a category 2, and you're going to involve the NHS, police and whatever, fire service, and we know what the process is, and it's defined who to talk to and all of that, because this business of the outer hours number and then no one can help is where we're at the minute. And on a really big disastrous scenario, Norfolk County Council had it. They had disastrous flooding and all the Cellnet network went down in part of the county, and they were using RayNet, the amateur radio service, because there is a RayNet service. They will set up VHF nets right across the county if you haven't got phones and email. There's all of that. So have we got any thought to actually providing a categorisation of what the emergencies? Most of them will just be number 1, won't they? They'll just be local stuff that we can handle. And then we can have defined in that phone numbers and the communications protocols, so that we just have an awareness what is going on. So members of the public ask us, we've got an in there to get an answer to them, and we can let you guys get on with your business, basically, from that point of view. But if it gets bigger than that, then there are willing hands around. Some of us even got reflective jackets, you know. For even first aid training, the more people, the merrier for that. But it's a question about the categorisation and this idea of gold, silver, and bronze. Obviously, Sean is gold; he's the managing director, and so on, and he nominates who's taking that role, and they're aware of in each sort of broad category of what the problems are, who to get in touch with, and so on. It's like a package for each one. That's what I'm saying.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
How can you do that and I can't? Yeah, in terms of the categorisation, there is a national categorisation. As you say, most of the things that we'll be dealing with are sort of local ones, but although we would still be dealing with it locally, whatever category it was. I mean, it could be part of what they call a catastrophic, which is the sort of top level one, would be something like East Coast flooding. But we'd still be concentrating very much on our local bit, although there would be a wider coordination sort of going on both within the county and nationally. So in terms of engaging with that, your engagement would still be locally, but there would be this mechanism for escalating it up to wherever. So, yeah, you'd ask the question locally. If we couldn't answer it locally, then we could escalate it up, even to central government. I mean, in the past, I've worked for the government side of things as well as locally, and were part of that escalation process. So, yes, I have had the, as a sort of government liaison officer, I have had the actual classic line of being able to say, Chief Constable, the Prime Minister's office is on the line to you. So it can literally work like that, to get that connection between. But your contact would be with what we set up locally at Rochford District Council.
But we would have a sort of a package that tells us what the structure is, and if we needed to find anything out, where the point of contact would be. That's
yeah. Well, what we've tried to do is not to make special arrangements just for emergencies. So if you needed to talk to us, we would be setting up something within the office. So you would ring through to the Rochford number as normal, and then they would put you through to our emergency information cell or whatever we'd set up to be dealing with that. Out of hours, yeah, I take all your points there in terms of what happens there. But what should happen is once we've set something up, we would let the Careline system know if there were alternative numbers to phone or what was happening, and sort of keep them informed. Clearly, from what you're saying, that hasn't happened in the past, but that's something I'm working on with the new Careline system.
The other issue that you're likely to come across is that in certain occasions it's very, very difficult to get through to what your district does. It can take up to an hour to get through. So there's an emergency and you're not sure what to do in that case. But it's something that needs to be looked at.
Maybe the introduction of an emergency line.
Yeah, I agree, and it is something that we are looking at as, again, we were talking earlier about how we prioritise the resources that we've got. Communications is one of the key things, particularly in an emergency, and we would look to reprioritise and put additional resources into things like the, so what do they call our team that answers all the phones? Customer services. Putting additional operators and things into the customer service to be able to deal with those increased inquiries.
Okay, thank you very much. I've got three members who have indicated to ask questions. So if I go to those three members, and then perhaps just I'm conscious of time and the fact we've still got another item to go. Councillor Mr. Mason.
Thank you, Chairman. I think I better pose this question specifically to Matt Hubbard-White because of its nature. There's one risk that's not mentioned anywhere in this report, and it was the reason why I, at least in parallel with the officers, was concerned about the Grenfell situation. And the area that's not actually covered at all is political risk. There's nothing in there about political risk. And it kind of links across to what Councillor Hoy was saying about command, chain of command. Now, we know, and I don't wish to embarrass anyone, we know that when we had our localised flooding, that there was a political intervention and it wasn't helpful. Let's put it that way. And one might say that around the Grenfell situation, there was a mix of both. There was unfortunate political interventions and no intervention. And the political risk is one that I think is silent here, and it needs to be managed. I think we need a proper protocol that engages all members in a political risk control protocol. It might be that it bans initially all political comment, any comment from any councillor, unless they've been specifically briefed by the council disaster recovery team or the leadership team. That's where I think these things go wrong. They also go wrong when there is something that is like Grenfell and it doesn't appear that the council's doing enough. And then residents, others, activists become involved, as we've seen, and the political response becomes imperative. And because it becomes imperative, it gets in the way of all the other things that need to be done by professionals who are working on the particular, DR emergency that's happened. There's a hole here. I'd like to see it filled. I think it needs to be filled urgently. There needs to be a protocol which all parties, all members of this council subscribe to, and ensure that we don't actually get involved in political intervention, which is inappropriate but there needs to equally be an appropriate protocol when it says it is appropriate and it needs to be good and it needs to be effective. So, Chairman, I rest that case, quite openly, and I hope it can be dealt with in the next iteration of this report.
Do you want to come back?
Just to come back briefly, in terms of Councillor Mason's point around Grenfell and the initial response, certainly the criticism there was the lack of the response and the speed of response coming the next day, and by then it already built up, the world's media were there, residents were already tweeting, and the council was slow to respond. So we're looking at, as part of some of testing of our plans, working with Vanessa, you heard from earlier, around how we can look at resilience in the comms team to look at how quickly we can respond and how we respond, because that is key, that you respond very, very quickly and you have this real clear messages out early. But certainly in terms of the political risk, I take Councillor Mason's point, and one of the earlier training schemes you ran out with members was more broadly around our response to an incident. But perhaps the next stage of that is around then what happens in terms of the communications and the political risk and what that protocol may look like. So certainly that's something we can consider as the next part of that training.
Okay.
Chairman, I think it needs to go further than training. If it's going to involve training, it's going to have to involve members to ensure that they know what to do. And in my opinion, members respond most appropriately to protocols, constitutions. That's what councils work well as. It's what most corporates do. I think it's got to be more than training. It's got to be more than, let's hope it's an understood situation. Let's have something, Chairman, that is completely codified, is flexible, but recognises the issue and seeks to manage it. I might use the term control, but maybe manage is an appropriate term. I'd like to see this come back, and I'd like to see it come back with that particular element properly discharged, Chairman.
Thank you. Yep.
Chairman, yes, I appreciate the comment. Yeah, it's something we can certainly bring back in terms of a protocol we could bring back to this committee.
Thank you very much. Councillor Cooper.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to go back to the volunteers. I know it's been talked about quite a lot this evening, but as a councillor, I was unaware of the volunteer scheme. Now, what untapped resources do we have among our members? Does the council know whether we've got retired paramedics? Do we know if we've got qualified first aiders? Does the council know this? Myself, I am a fully qualified first aider, and I was trained as a combat medic. But so you didn't know that. And this is what you need to find out with the members, because the members know their area, they're aware of all the footpaths, etc., etc., etc. And I think that if the members would volunteer, it would be an asset to your voluntary service. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. I take that's something you'll bear in mind and bring back. Councillor Griffin.
Thank you, Chairman. I have two separate questions. When we had some flooding problems a few years ago, there was talk of the council acquiring some four-wheel drive vehicles with snorkel exhausts. Does the council possess any of those vehicles? No. Right, thank you. Going back to the Grenfell flats fire, when the people were forced to evacuate or were rescued from the tower, obviously their personal possessions were left behind. They were in need of money, and the amount of money that the council offered was paltry. I think it was £10 per person. It may have even been £10 per family. I'm not quite sure. Do we have Is there an authorisation for the council to issue money to people in an emergency, in an out of hours situation?
Got it. No, is the short answer to that one. What we would do is very much look at the circumstances at the time. As I was saying earlier, with rest centres, very much the main activity within the rest centre, beyond obviously making people as comfortable as possible and reassuring them as they come in, is to then look at getting them into other accommodation. And depending on their needs and circumstances, we may do that in different ways, which may involve some funding and contribution that either we have to find or social services have to find, or sometimes through the voluntary sector and other ways. So there's no set answer to that. It's very much going to depend. I know in the past there's been a number of issues, even going back to the sort of 80s when the North Wales flooding occurred, where they tried to sort of give a contribution, and it ended up such an administrative nightmare. It sort of completely wiped out any benefit to the people who received it. So I think we've got to go with sort of existing systems of assessing where there's a need, looking at the benefits available and helping people in that sort of way, rather than trying to sort of make a contribution to appease people with some cash. It's in the experiences that I've looked at, it's never worked, and it certainly didn't work at Grenfell as well.
Thank you very much.
And just for the recorded records, no, we do have four-wheel drive vehicles within the council, but there's none specifically fitted with snorkels or anything for wading.
Right,
Thank you. Councillor Hookway, you've indicated to ask a question. You've said it's going to be brief.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, in relation to what was said about vehicles which are suitable for dealing with issues of flooded roads and stuff like that, although it may be might be impractical for the council to have adapted vehicles to meet that, there are clubs and various different groups that will have vehicles that might be suitable. Is that part of the planning? Have you got direct contact with any of these sort of like clubs, like Land Rover clubs or four-wheel drive, sort of like off-road clubs, etc.?
Again. Yes, it's called Rover Rescue. Primarily, it is a Land Rover-based club, but they use other vehicles as well. The contact for that is not at a local level. We go through the county voluntary sort of sector group, so it brings in people from all over the county. So the answer is yes.
Thank you. Okay, can we make this the final question? Well, Councillor Newport was indicated actually. It's going to be short. Yep.
Yeah, I'll keep it brief. So this plan is all about how the council plans for these, emergencies. Perhaps the council could consider a media campaign on how residents could plan for emergencies as well. And what I'm talking about is things like, do they know where their documents are, who their insurers are, etc. Because I think that would really help in those situations. Get to a rest centre, they'd know who their insurer are. It would cut back our work as well.
Yes, we have. Must be something with my fingers. Yes, we have issued that advice from time to time, and it is on the that sort of advice is on the website as well for people. We're working just at the moment on a county-wide pre-evacuation advice document, which would be available both as a document and also to put on websites and send out through media at the time and that sort of thing. So yes, it is something we're aware of. It is part of the work that we're doing around rest centres and improving how those work and if people are having to evacuate. There is also in conjunction with that work going on that is looking at sort of community response and what they call spontaneous volunteers, so people who say they will help at the time. there are issues in both those sorts of areas that we need to resolve, but that's being worked on at a sort of county level, and we're waiting to see really what comes out of that, because we want to try and make sure that we sort of reflect what each other are doing, rather than being a postcode lottery depending on which district you're in.
Okay, thank you. Right, the very last question, Councillor Cooper. Yes.
It was just going back to the emergency vehicles. You're saying that you've got clubs that will come in from the district. Well, in my particular village or my ward, I know of like 4 or 5 emergency vehicles that can be used straight away. So this is another thing that you need to be put into the ward councillors to find out who can volunteer with these big Land Rovers, etc., etc. I mean, myself, I've got 3 of them, so...
Rumour has it you've got a tank.
That's only a rumour, man. That's not coming out yet. And the last question, if I'm going to use my own vehicle, can I have a blue light?
Right. Thank you very much. Were you indicating you wanted to come back then? Or? Okay. Members, the recommendation is to note the contents of the report, which we can. I think it's been identified that this needs to come back. Matt, can I ask you if you've got an idea of when you would be able to do that, especially with an emphasis on, I think, volunteers, kind of a voluntary rollout to members, which I think most members agree would be an extremely beneficial thing to do. And with regards to political intervention, as Councillor Mr Mason has pointed out, being included perhaps as a...
For a 6-month time frame, that seems to be first report.
Make it 5.
I guess we'll have to.
Just to make it different. Yeah, shall we negotiate?
I mean, obviously, that takes us into a new municipal year, so I would say... I think
5 months.
There's 5.
Yeah.
It's June, isn't it?
June.
It's 5.
Chairman, happy to be led by your recommendation, Chairman.
June is okay, isn't it? Yeah, 5 months then. June. And also the focus on, I think, member communication in the event of a disaster.
Chairman, sorry, could I just to clarify the points that members wish to cover, so I'm clear?
Yep.
Could I just ask Chairman just to clarify the points?
Extending the voluntary service, the voluntary training to members. The political intervention protocol that Councillor Mr Mason referred to, and a focus on communicating and involving members at the time of a disaster, ward members at the time of a potential disaster.
Thank you.
And also...
Oh, with categorisation, yes, sorry.
And who is in a way of saying who is in charge of command, so people know who.
And also the members' protocols.
Yeah. So is that clear? Brilliant. Thank you very much. Thank you, members. Moving on to item number 8, which was the petition project. You are welcome to leave. Sorry. That's twice I've done that this evening. So, item number 8, which is the council's petition process. Unfortunately, John Bostock is away on holiday, and Angela Law is off sick. So obviously neither of those are able to attend this evening. The item is referred to the committee as the petition organiser has requested that the review committee review the way his request was handled. Members will have had the report sent to them, and obviously will be fully aware of what petition this is in respect of. Unfortunately, Mr Lambourne was due to attend this evening's meeting and give us an idea of what particular parts of the process he wasn't happy with and what he possibly was happy with. Unfortunately, at the very, very last minute, at 5 to 5, we received an email to tell us that he wouldn't be attending this evening. Obviously, members have seen the report and additional documentation, I would also advise that there have been some email exchanges, in particular today, with Mr. Lambourne, albeit very late, and Michelle, and copying me in as well. And at the very last minute, he has raised 5 points. I'm just checking that is the last email I've had. Possibly it's all been done very, very last minute, unfortunately, and
Chairman, I'm going to move we defer this to the next meeting so that we can be fully briefed on what Mr. Lambourne has commented on. We can see the emails, we can talk to officers if we wish to individually, and we can make an informed decision if a decision's required. Right, I've moved it. Any seconds? Thank you.
Okay, all in favour? Agreed. Okay, moving on to item number 9, which is the key decisions document. Refer to Paul.
Right. Has everybody got a copy? Yeah. Here we go. I might give you more.
You not got one? Got it.
Okay, so if you've all got a copy, 1317, the Brownfield Register was already on there from last month. 1417, you will have seen the report that was issued on the 5th of January with the decision due shortly. 1517 was already on there last month, and 1617 was on there last month. There are 2 new ones. 1717 Memorandum of Understanding, Essex Recreation Disturbance Avoidance and Mitigation Strategy.
Okay.
And then the last one is 1817, the voluntary sector grant allocations, which is the regular one that appears every year.
Been circulated as well, I think, to
Yeah.
members, hasn't it? Councillor Hookway.
Thank you, Chairman. With the voluntary sector grant allocation, I know that in previous years, when I was involved with that, it normally took place before Christmas, and this is now due to be, the meeting's due to be held sometime in middle of February. Why is it 2 months later than previous years?
Yep, sorry, Councillor Hoy. Yep.
Sorry, all the officers left, haven't they? As far as I understand it, it used to be held in December, just before Christmas, but they've changed it because the decision is now more in line with the budget, and they need to make the decision after the budget has been decided.
Yeah,
so it's all part of the budget process, so it can't be made before the budget, it has to be made after. That's my understanding.
Yeah. Is that okay, Councillor Hookway? Have any members got any further questions on any of those items? No? Okay. Moving on to item 10, which is the work plan. Again, Paul, if you could go through that.
Okay. Next month we have the Treasury Management Strategy Statement and Annual Investment Strategy to come to committee, and that will also cover the authority loans, etc., that the statement was about from the Section 151 today.
Councillor Mr Mason.
Chairman, this is the right time to comment. I took the statement as it stood, but of course that kind of indicated that the matter would be looked at again in the Treasury Management Strategy statement. I'd like to ask through you and through our officer to ask our Section 151 officer what financial analysis of other local authorities we will undertake before lending to them, because they're not subject to any rating agency. I think we've all become aware that some councils have been borrowing for all sorts of reasons, and there is speculation as to the current health of some local authorities, and that's the DCLG's own concerns, hence the need for the consultation and possible change of policy. So I'd like that report to respond particularly to how we undertake a credit analysis of another council's finance.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, that's fine. I'll feed that back. And obviously, for next month now, we will also have the petition process back for that. Then there aren't any other changes. The project teams still remain. I did.
Sorry, Karen.
I did identify. Yeah, I did identify a date for the ICT, but I think, or 2 dates that were possible, but I think that's gone by the by. So I'll have to come back out on that with another selection of dates.
And also with regards to the Constitution, the review of the Constitution, I have contacted Angela on 2 occasions since the last meeting for an update and a proposed date to continue with it. Unfortunately, I've had no response from her and she's now off sick, so I will have to wait until she returns. I didn't realise actually at the time
she's
that
actually
she
been
was
sick since Christmas, so yeah.
And she's not due
between
back for a
Christmas.
couple of weeks, I don't think.
End of this week.
Oh right, okay.
So hopefully Monday.
Councillor Mrs Mason.
Mr Chairman, if the assistant director is unwell for a sustained period, then who substitutes for her? Because this has been going on for a year now. I appreciate that she can't help being unwell at this point in time, but it's a year since this. I mean, what's the point of having a project team that never meets?
No, I agree. And obviously I spoke to her and contacted her and she was intending to get back to me and confirm and clarify it, so everything was perfectly acceptable. I then wasn't aware that she was off sick and chased her up for it, and obviously found out that she is. If she's due back this week, I'll take her up again. I think your question is a valid one.
If she's not due back, then someone else needs to undertake this role.
No, she is, I believe, so I will expect an answer from her within the next week. Councillor Mr Mason.
Chairman, I was also going to comment in a similar way. Could I ask, I mean, every assistant director reports to either the managing director or the strategic director. When Nicholas Kahn held the post, Angela Law, the legal assistant director, reported to the strategic director. So is it the case that in the absence of Angela Law, that it's Angela Hutchins who you need to contact?
Possibly, I'll have to find out. At the time, obviously, I thought it was Angela Law, and I wasn't aware that she was off long term. So.
The point I'm kind of making is that I think there needs to be a targeting management process involved in this. And I know Nick Kahn's been gone since July, and I would imagine that Sean's been stretched, because I would be, so that's an expectation. So I wonder if it's time to get Angela involved in this issue, particularly as Councillor Mrs Mason makes the particular point of the time that's expended since the last review of anything.
And also, it was the 5th of December, the last meeting, so
Okay, I think Paul has just clarified it would be Angela Hutchins. And as Angela Law is due back this week.
Next Monday we would expect her back.
Right, okay. Okay, that'll be...
I wanted to say, Chairman, it's a recommendation to my colleagues, if you like, in the context of this committee. The task group on ICT has been meeting for, well, not terribly often, for some time. I think it's time for the ICT task group to at least come back with an interim report to this committee on what it's looked at, what it's found, and what its recommendations are on an interim basis, and to, in particular, to take reference to the fact is, do they need to continue, or does it need to be tackled in another way?
Okay, thank you. Okay. Okay. Thank you, members. Meeting closes at 9:47. Thank you.